The banker said pay, by Monday, or lose the house. The blacksmith said, not while I am standing here. The notice arrived on a Wednesday. It was written on bank stationery, signed by Horace Platt, president of the Miners and Merchants Bank of Silver Falls, Idaho Territory, and it said that the balance of the mortgage on the property at 14 Cottonwood Street, the house, the garden, the chicken coop, and the 40 feet of frontage that included the front porch, where Agnes Whitfield sat every evening and watched the sun go down behind the sawtooths, was past due by 90 days, and that if the sum of $62 was not remitted by Monday, the bank would exercise its right to foreclose and sell the property at auction. Agnes read the notice twice. She read it the way a person reads a letter that contains news they have been expecting but hoping would not arrive, with the slow, deliberate attention of someone who wants to be certain they understand every word before they allow the words to mean what they mean. She owed $62. She had 11. The distance between 11 and 62 was $51, which was more than most people in Silver Falls earned in a month, and more than Agnes had earned in 3, because Agnes was a seamstress, and the territory was in a downturn, and the miners who used to bring their mending had gone to the Coeur d'Alene strikes, and the ranchers who used to order shirts were buying from the catalog instead, and the catalog did not need to eat or pay a mortgage. Agnes had tried taking in boarders, but the house had only 2 bedrooms, and the second was barely large enough for a bed and a washstand, and the one boarder she had taken, a traveling salesman who stayed 3 weeks and left without paying, had cured her of the experiment. Her husband, William, had taken out the mortgage 2 years ago to buy the house, and William had died 6 months later of a lung ailment that the doctor called consumption, and that Agnes called the thing that took everything. He left her the house, and the mortgage and the sewing machine, and a good name that everyone in Silver Falls respected, and that was worth exactly nothing at the bank window, where Horace Platt sat behind his desk and calculated foreclosures with the dispassionate efficiency of a man who believed that business and compassion were separate categories that should never be mixed. Agnes was 30. She had brown hair going early to gray at the temples from worry more than age, and hands that were nimble from the needle, and a spine that was straighter than most, which she needed because the world had been leaning on it hard. She had kept up the mortgage payments for 18 months after William died, finding the money through a combination of sewing, laundry, baking, and the systematic reduction of every expense that could be reduced. No sugar, no coffee, no fabric for herself, no anything that was not strictly necessary. But the downturn had taken the sewing work, and the laundry work, and most of the baking orders, and the mortgage had slipped from current to late to past due, to the notice on the bank stationery that she held in her hands on a Wednesday afternoon in October. She went to see Platt. She walked to the bank in her best dress, which was also her only dress that did not have patches, and she stood at the counter and asked to speak with the president, and was shown into the office, where Horace Platt sat behind a desk that was larger than it needed to be, and more polished than the man sitting behind it. "Mr. Platt, I received the notice. I am asking for an extension." Platt looked at her over his spectacles. He was a man of moderate height and immoderate self-regard, with the soft hands of someone who had never built anything, and the hard eyes of someone who had foreclosed on people who had. "Mrs. Whitfield, the terms of the mortgage are clear. 90 days past due triggers the foreclosure clause. The bank has been more than patient. The bank has been exactly as patient as the contract requires, and not 1 day more. I am asking for patience beyond the contract." The bank does not extend patience beyond the contract. The bank extends contracts. If you would like to refinance at the current rate, which is 8%, I can draw up the papers. The current rate, when William took the mortgage, was 5%. Rates change. Rates change when bankers change them. The rate did not change on its own. Platt removed his spectacles and polished them with a cloth that was cleaner than his conscience. He set them back on his nose and looked at Agnes the way he looked at all debtors, as a number on a ledger that was either in the black or in the red, and the color determined the conversation. "Mrs. Whitfield, I sympathize with your situation, but the bank has obligations to its depositors. If you cannot pay by Monday, the property will be listed for auction. I suggest you make arrangements." Agnes left the bank and walked down the main street of Silver Falls with the particular gait of a person who is holding herself together through force of will and who understands that the will is finite and the forces against it are not. She walked past the general store where she owed a small balance, past the post office where letters from her sister in Ohio arrived every month, asking whether she was managing, past the livery stable where William's horse had been stabled before she sold it, and past the blacksmith shop. And she did not stop at any of them, because stopping would require speaking, and speaking would require composure, and composure was something she was running low on. Lyall Gentry saw her pass. He was standing at the forge, which is where Lyall Gentry stood for most of his waking hours, because the forge was his livelihood and his sanctuary, and the place where the world made sense to him in a way that it did not make sense elsewhere. He was 35, a widower himself, though he rarely spoke of it, broad through the shoulders and thick through the arms, and scarred on both hands from the work, with a face that was more honest than handsome, and a temperament that matched the forge, hot when provoked, steady when left alone, capable of shaping hard things into useful things through patience and pressure. He saw Agnes walking. He saw the notice in her hand. He saw her face, which was composed in the way that a dam is composed, holding back something that would be considerable if it broke through. He had known Agnes for 2 years, since she and William moved to Silver Falls. He had shod the horse that William sold before he died. He had repaired the stove that Agnes could not afford to replace. He had mended the gate that the wind tore off its hinges in March, and reset the chimney cap that the snow knocked loose in January. He had done these things because they needed doing, and he had charged less than the work was worth, because Agnes could not afford what the work was worth, and the difference between what he charged and what the work cost was a debt that he kept in his own ledger and that Agnes did not know about. He set down his hammer. He wiped his hands on his apron. He walked to the door of the shop and said, "Mrs. Whitfield." Agnes stopped. She turned. She looked at the blacksmith with the guarded expression of a person who does not want to be seen in the state she is in, but cannot avoid being seen, because the street is public and the blacksmith is observant. "Mr. Gentry, you have been to the bank." "I have. It did not go well." "It did not. Come inside. I have coffee." She came inside. She sat on the worn wooden bench by the forge where customers sat while they waited for their work, and she drank the coffee that Lyall poured from the pot he kept on the edge of the forge, and she told him about the notice and the $62 and the Monday deadline and the 8% refinance offer that was not an offer but a trap, because 8% on a house she could barely afford at 5% was a guarantee of future foreclosure, dressed up as present mercy. Lyall listened. He listened the way he worked, with complete attention and without interruption, processing the information the way he processed iron, turning it over, examining it from every angle, looking for the flaw and for the fix. "How much do you have?" he asked. $11. "The full amount is $62.14. Platt was specific about the 14 cents. Lyall stood up from the bench. He walked to the back of the shop where he kept a tin box under a loose board in the floor. The tin box contained his savings, which were not large because blacksmiths in small towns do not accumulate wealth. They accumulate skill and reputation, and the respect of people whose horses they shoe and whose plows they mend. And none of those things fit in a tin box. He carefully counted the money. He had $43. 43 and 11 was 54. 54 was not 62. He put the money back. He thought about it for the rest of the afternoon, hammering iron and thinking about Agnes Whitfield and $62, and Horace Platt, and the particular injustice of a system that allowed a man with soft hands to take a house from a woman with nimble ones because the woman's husband had died and the economy had shifted, and $51 was the distance between keeping a home and losing one forever. He went to see 3 people that evening. He closed the shop early, which he had not done in 3 years. He went to the livery owner, who owed him for 6 months of shoeing and who paid $12 of the debt when Lyall explained why he needed it. He went to the rancher north of town, who owed him for a plow repair and who paid $4. He went to the storekeeper, who owed him nothing, but who lent him $2, because the storekeeper was a fair man who had watched Agnes Whitfield hold her life together with needle and thread and willpower for 18 months. And because Lyall Gentry had never asked anyone for anything in all the years the storekeeper had known him, and the asking itself was worth more than the $2. 43 and 12 and 4 and 2 was 61, plus Agnes's 11 was 72. 62.14 from 72 left $9.86. On Monday morning, Lyall Gentry walked into the Miners and Merchants Bank of Silver Falls with Agnes Whitfield beside him. He was wearing his clean shirt, which was not very clean because forge soot is persistent and embeds itself in fabric the way certain people embed themselves in a community, thoroughly and permanently. And he was carrying an envelope that contained $72 in mixed bills and coin. Platt looked up from his desk. He looked at the blacksmith, and he looked at the widow, and he looked at the envelope, and his expression underwent the subtle rearrangement of a man who has anticipated an outcome and is now confronting a different one. "We are here to pay the mortgage," Lyall said. "The full amount?" "The full amount, $62.14, plus the remainder applied to next month's payment." Platt took the envelope. He counted the money with the meticulous speed of a man who counts money professionally. He wrote the receipt. He stamped the ledger. He did all of this without expression, because expressing anything, surprise, disappointment, respect, would require acknowledging that the outcome was not the one he had planned for, and Horace Platt did not acknowledge things he had not planned for. "The mortgage is current," he said. "Next payment is due November 1st. "It will be here November 1st, Lyall said. He said it looking at Platt, and the look contained everything that Lyall Gentry felt about bankers who raised rates on widows and foreclosed on houses and calculated the 14 cents, because the 14 cents was part of the debt, and the debt was the point. Every month, on time, for as long as the mortgage runs. They walked out of the bank together. They stood on the wooden sidewalk in the October sun, and Agnes looked at the blacksmith who had just paid her mortgage with money he could not spare, and said, "Why?" Lyall looked at her. He looked at her with the honest, uncomplicated directness of a man who does not know how to be indirect and has never seen the point of trying. "Because the house is yours. Because Platt is wrong. Because I have hands that can earn money, and a forge that makes it possible. And $62 is a number, not a reason to lose your home. I will pay you back. You will pay me back by staying in the house. That is payment enough." It was not enough, and both of them knew it. And the knowing was the beginning of something that had been present between them since the day Lyall repaired her stove and charged her half. A connection built not on romance, but on the simpler, sturdier foundation of one person refusing to let another person fall. It was the kind of foundation that romances are eventually built on, because the qualities that make a person willing to pay someone else's mortgage, generosity, attentiveness, the refusal to look away from need, are the same qualities that make a person worth loving, and Agnes was not so consumed by survival that she could not recognize them. Agnes paid back every dollar. She paid it back over 14 months, in small amounts, delivered to the blacksmith shop in envelopes that Lyall accepted without counting, because counting would have made the repayment feel like a transaction, and it was not a transaction. It was a conversation conducted in dollars, and the conversation was about dignity and gratitude, and the slow, stubborn accumulation of trust between two people who had been alone long enough to recognize that being alone was a habit, not a preference. They married the following spring, on a Saturday when the dogwood was blooming along the creek and the sawtooths still carried snow on their highest peaks, in the house at 14 Cottonwood Street, with the mortgage paid down to $31, and the garden planted, and the porch where Agnes watched the sunsets now wide enough for 2 chairs instead of 1. Lyall moved his tin box from under the loose board in the shop floor to the shelf in the bedroom closet, and Agnes added her sewing money to it each week. The sewing work had returned, as the economy recovered, and as her reputation for fine stitching spread beyond Silver Falls to the ranches in the valley. And the box grew heavier by increments that were small but steady, the way a life grows when 2 people build it together instead of apart. The blacksmith and the seamstress kept the house. They kept each other. And Horace Platt, who continued to sit behind his desk and calculate foreclosures with dispassionate efficiency, never again sent a notice to 14 Cottonwood Street, because the payments arrived on the first of every month, delivered by a broad-shouldered man with scarred hands, who set the envelope on the counter without a word and walked out without waiting for a receipt, because the receipt was not the point, and had never been the point, and both of them knew it.